Hey everyone, you're here sewing with Cody. And in this video, I'm working on the Bernina L850. But what we're doing today doesn't have to be done in L850. But what we're doing today is we are piecing a quilt. I'm going to show you how to set up your serger to piece a quilt on your serger. So what I did, I recently finished this morning, which if you follow me on my Instagram page, which is Living with Cody and Pete, I post a lot of stuff on there, just things I'm working with. So here, I did this Tulip Quilt. It was just using a charm pack, super simple pattern, but the entire thing was pieced by the serger. So you get beautiful 1/4-inch seams and everything is nice and finished. So you don't have any fraying or anything, everything lays so nice and flat. So what we're gonna do is I'm going to show you how to set up your serger to do something just like this. So what we'll be doing something simple like this little block here. And as you can see, the back is nice and finished. So the trick is to set up the serger to give you a perfect 1/4-inch seam. So here on this L850, I have it threaded for a 3-thread overlock, a wide 3-thread overlock. So what determines the width of a stitch essentially on an overlocker is one you're cutting with, so basically how much fabric you're cutting. But most importantly is your needle position. So here we're using the left needle and just the left needle because there's no need to use 2-thread. We have seen a 3-thread overlock using the left needle, so we remove the right needle and just have the left needle threaded. Our tensions are the basic for our overlock, like for this machine and most of our Berninas at least, it's just 4, 4, 4, or 4 if you're doing 4-thread. The next thing is your cutting width. So here I've got my cutting width set at 6. And if we take a closer look at our foot pedal, if we take a closer look at our presser foot, we'll see some things. Let's look. So if we look at our presser foot here, we see a few different things. So here we see 2 notches, 2 distinct notches. These represent our needle position. So this is our left needle position, this is our right needle position, or our right needle. And then on this L850, we see another little notch right here. See that little notch, that smaller notch? That represents the blade, the cutter, when it's set at a 6. So we have our cutting width set at a 6. Our blade lines up right there with that little notch. So as you see here, we have our handy dandy, really amazing, it truly is wonderful, seam guide. So this can move wherever we want. We can just slide it back and forth, and we can also squeeze it and just take it off. But what we have here is we have the seam guide slid, so right here lines up perfectly with that first little notch, which represents the thread cutter, the fabric cutter, So we've got our cutting width at 6, our left needle, 3-thread overlock, our pressure foot pressure, we can just leave it at that 4, like the neutral. We've got our seam guide, our micro thread control really should be at fine at 0. So, but on the side where you can control your differential feed and your stitch length. So we have our stitch length set just a 2.5. That's all we really need. If you want, you can decrease it down to a 2, so your stitches are a little closer together. But your differential feed for the cotton fabric we'll be working with, we'll just have it set at 1, or basically neutral. So what I want you to do is I want you to take a scrap fabric and I want you to take a stitch. So let's see. So we've got our stitch. So then I want you to take a ruler. Like a small creative grade works perfectly because we have that nice 1/4-inch marking here. So what I want you to do, and you always do this before you test, you always test before you actually stitch your quilt, is so we're going to take our 1/4 inch, we're going to line up that 1/4 inch marking with the bottom where the actual needle is going to be stitching. And then we look and see. It lines up perfectly. I can stop moving it. It lines up perfectly. So what that tells us is that this 1/4 inch seam allowance is perfect, right on the dot. And so as you can see down here, we just barely shaved off any fabric. And that's what we want. You just want to just barely shave. You just want to get a nice clean edge without taking off any measurable amount of fabric. So what we have here is a perfect 1/4 inch. And now you just piece everything together just like you would on the sewing machine. So you can check out, like I mentioned, check out my Instagram page, Living with Cody and Pete, and you'll see some of the pictures step by step that I did with the Tulip Pink fabric, making that little quilt. But continue on, and we'll be working on this little guy here. Make sure our cutter's engaged, and let's get started. So I've already got some little blocks just already cut out. So all we're going to do is just piece them together or lay them together just like you normally would if you're working on the sewing machine. And if you work with the same exact blocks, you can definitely do some chain piecing, but all my blocks can be a little different. So we're going to press that, and you can see how pretty that seam is. So if you're working with, if you're going to do a whole quilt, I would recommend using a thinner thread, like a Deco Bob, that 80 weight thread that I enjoy using a lot. That works beautifully on this machine. So that's what I would recommend using. So we'll just lay this here. Let's line up everything. And you can see how quick and how easy all of this goes together. So my backs are nice and pretty. So that's my first little block. And let's see what I got for this one. I just randomly cut some squares out of a charm pack that I found laying on the table in the other room. And I have machines set at the half motor speed, so it's not going too fast, but you definitely can work and use at the maximum speed, because a half motor speed, remember, it's just in the door, just this little button right here. And I'm really enjoying working with the half motor speed. It just gives me a good speed without going too fast. So let's lay this here. And I love the guide. The fabric guide, it's amazing. And I have it so it's really not trimming off any threads. I mean, any fabric. Just a little bit, because these were from a charm pack, and they have that pinked edge. And I don't mind trimming a little bit of that off. So what I'm finding is I am actually, the part that I'm sewing is going to be that pinked edge. So it can trim off a little bit of that, give me a little bit flatter edge. So it's really just kind of just barely shaving that off. But using a thinner thread will allow my seams to lay even flatter. And of course, just like when you're sewing, you want to make sure that your seams, when you're interlocking these blocks, one part is going one way, and then this other part is going the opposite direction. So I can look at it here. So this allows for those seams to interlock and allows for that seam to be perfect. And sometimes, depending on what, it's going to have gone the wrong way, but depending on which, like what I'm putting together, how intricate everything may be, I may even put a little bit of like applique glue in that little seam. And it'll kind of hold it together because it dries really quickly. And it gives me a perfect seam without worrying about it shifting. Now, not every quilt would you want to put together on a serger by any means, but a lot of your geometric square quilts or just your geometric quilts work out perfectly. So this is my perfect little block. So I'm going to take these to my iron and I'll come right back. Okay, we are back from the iron. We pressed and trimmed up our squares, or squared up our squares. So now we're just going to sew them together. Let's see. Got to figure out where I want what.
Come back to the serger and just stitch them together.
It does make this go a lot quicker than a regular sewing machine. And it feeds all the layers super easy. Able to match up all the seams. And it trims it up so nicely. And there we have it, a little block. So what you can do here, of course, like if this was your finished quilt, if it was much bigger, obviously, you would have it all pressed. And then what you can do, you can go and just kind of serge all around the edges, especially since this one doesn't have a border. You have all those exposed seams that could come undone when you bring it to your long arm quilter. So you want to make sure that you have it stitched down so these end seams don't kind of pull apart. I always enjoy a quilt that comes in when I have to quilt it for somebody, that when they don't have a border on their quilt, that they've gone around and stitched either by a serger or by a sewing machine, go around and stay stitch the edges, because those seams have a tendency to come undone while we're quilting and working with the quilt on the frame. So just going around and trimming up the quilt does make a big difference. And especially making sure all your seams are laying in the same direction. And that's it. So that's how you can easily put a quilt block or an entire quilt together on an overlocker. All right, well, hopefully you'll give that a try because it can be a lot of fun. And as you can see, it went fairly quick. The best part about serging your quilt pieces together to make your quilt is the back. So the back is nice and flat, nice and clean, especially when you're working with some fabric likes to fray a little bit more than others. Here you don't have any little excess threads. Everything's nice and encapsulated in that serge. So not only is it nice and quick for our geometric blocks like a 9-patch or a 4-patch or even just a strip quilt, but it just makes it look nice and pretty, especially for our finished quilt. Alright, well, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and always remember, happy sewing.